Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 9th Canto, 10th chapter, 20th verse. Tenikapa Raghupatya Avipatya Sarve Tandvam Varutam Ihupatya Ratasvayodhai Chaglor Dumar Giri Gadeshubhya Angadadya Sita Bimarsha Atamangala Ravanesha. Translation. Angada and the other commanders of the soldiers of Ramachandra faced the elephants, infantry, horses, and chariots of the enemy and hurled against them big trees, mountain peaks, clubs, and arrows. Thus the soldiers of Lord Ramachandra killed Ravana's soldiers, who had lost all good fortune because Ravana had been condemned by the anger of Mother Sita.
This one, if you want me to read it or someone else to read it.
Ashu? I just read the translation so far.
I can say it, I don't know. One thing, I think everyone can move. I know there's room right now. Thank you, sir. The soldiers Lord Ramachandra recruited in the jungle were all monkeys and did not have proper equipment with which to fight the soldiers of Ravana. For Ravana's soldiers were equipped with weapons of modern warfare, whereas the monkeys could only throw stones, mountain peaks, and trees. It was only Lord Ramachandra and Lakshman who shot some arrows. But because the soldiers of Ravana were condemned by the curse of Mother Sita, the monkeys were able to kill them simply by throwing stones and trees. There are two kinds of strength, Daiva and Purushakara. Daiva refers to the strength achieved from the transcendence, and Purushakara refers to the strength organized by one's own intelligence and power. Transcendental power is always superior to the power of the materialist. Depending on the mercy of the Supreme Lord, one must fight one's enemies, even though one may not be equipped with modern weapons. Therefore, Krishna instructed Arjuna, Mam Anusmara Yudhya Cha. Think of me and fight. We should fight our enemy to the best of our ability. But for victory, we must depend on the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I'll read the translation again. Angada and the other commanders of the soldiers of Ramachandra faced the elephants, infantry, horses, and chariots of the enemy and hurled against them big trees, mountain peaks, clubs, and arrows. Thus, the soldiers of Lord Ramachandra killed Ravana's soldiers, who had lost all good fortune because Ravana had been condemned by the anger of Mother Sita.
Huh? Om Jnana-timirandasya Niranjana-salakaya Chakshura Umyedavya Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachani Angum Nandayate Gari Yakripatamaham Vande Shri Gurunatanam Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharani Vishesha Shinyavari Pastuchale Satarane Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So, actually 2 days ago was Rama Navami, and we already spoke then from a verse from Srimad Bhagavatam. And we'll speak about, because today we're also observing Rama Navami for those who weren't able to participate in our program 2 days ago. I have chosen another verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is connected to Lord Ramachandra's pastimes. The other day we spoke about how Lord Ramachandra was the appearance of the Lord to fulfill the particular purpose of manifesting the activities of an ideal king. Or as we've talked about how he was Mayad Purushottama. He was the topmost personality who manifested the qualities of strict Vedic adherence to Vedic principles. And here in this verse, it speaks about Angada. Angada was actually he was the son of Vali. And after Vali, who was king of the monkeys, who had usurped the kingdom from his brother Sugriva, and after he was killed, Angada was given shelter by Sugriva and was also taking part and commissioned by Lord Ramachandra along with Sugriva and many of the other commanders, monkeys, to assist Lord Ramachandra in his efforts to find Sita. And of course, Lord Ramachandra could have accomplished this all by himself, but nonetheless, he was engaging these servants to assist him in manifesting his purposes for his descent. This verse actually speaks about how the Lord engaged. In fact, there's another verse. I was just going to read the translation to it. It's from the 5th canto of the Bhagavatam, which elaborates a little bit more on the point of this verse. And in the 5th canto, it is stated that one cannot establish a friendship with the Supreme Lord Ramachandra on the basis of material qualities, such as one's birth in an aristocratic family, one's personal beauty, one's eloquence, one's sharp intelligence, or one's superior race or nation. None of these qualifications is actually a prerequisite for friendship with Lord Sri Ramachandra. Otherwise, how is it possible that although we, uncivilized inhabitants, this is Hanuman speaking, otherwise, how is it possible that although we, uncivilized inhabitants of the forest, have not taken noble births, although we have no physical beauty, and although we cannot speak like gentlemen, Lord Ramachandra has nevertheless accepted us as friends. This is one of the verses among many verses which were spoken by Hanuman, who resides in Kimpurusha Loka, and who is always engaged, along with his other residents of Kimpurusha Loka, in chanting the glories of Lord Ramachandra and hearing the glories. And in this prayer, Hanuman is expressing the kindness of the Lord, how merciful He is, that although we have no qualification whatsoever, we've not taken a very high birth, we have not, we're not very experienced. Nonetheless, He has befriended us, and not only has He befriended Hanuman and engaged him and engaged the entire Vanara race of monkeys, but here we see that although they had no qualification, nonetheless they were very successful in fulfilling the Lord's purpose and defeating Ravana. In fact, I recently heard a nice story in this connection. Srila Prabhupada was in Bombay. He was speaking to one devotee, and he was explaining how the West and America, they were like Ravana, because they had stolen the opulence which actually belonged to Ram. His Sita, she is the goddess of fortune. And Prabhupada even explains in the Bhagavatam purport that in the West people are trying to take Sita, or the goddess of fortune, away from Ramachandra. And although fortune is always meant to be engaged in the service of the Lord, those who try to take it away and use it for their own selfish purposes, they are compared to be like Ravana. Ravana is understood to be like the personification of lust. And because Ravana's only concern was how to enjoy, so much so that he was ready to undergo great risk in attempting to kidnap Sita from Lord Ramachandra in order to enjoy her, although she refused to allow herself to be enjoyed in any way. Of course, there's another story in connection of that. It's a little side point that actually Ravana never actually took Sita. This is also explained in Chaitanya Charitamrita. When Lord Chaitanya went to Rameshwaram, he found in the scripture, the Koma Purana, where it's described that when Ravana attempted to kidnap Sita, Sita actually took shelter of Agni, the fire god. And Agni took her away and gave a Maya Sita, a false Sita, for Ravana to kidnap, because it's not possible for anyone to take away the goddess of fortune, Lord Ramachandra. But externally it appeared, and Ravana thought that he had kidnapped Sita and he attempted to enjoy, but it was actually the false Sita. And Lord Chaitanya actually, when he went to, I think it was Rameshwaram, he found in his book, the Koma Purana, he found these pages, and he took these pages from the scripture. Although Prabhupada explains in the commentary, although he took the pages, he didn't carefully copied them over and replaced them so that the scripture would not be in any way. But he took the originals, because he wanted to take the originals to show to Ramdas Vipra, who was a Brahmana, who was always in excruciating pain, because it was so difficult for him to understand how was it that Ravana was able to kidnap Sita. So Lord Chaitanya took these 2 pages from the Kuma Purana and brought it to Ramdas Vipra and showed him, see, actually Ravana never actually kidnapped Sita. It was Maya Sita. And in fact, later, when there were the accusations of how Sita's chastity was disrupted because of her being kidnapped by Ravana, when she entered into the fire to prove her chastity, it is understood that it was Maya Sita who entered the fire, and then actually Sita then manifested her original form. Nonetheless, Prabhupada explains that people in the West, they're of the mentality of Ravana because they were trying to enjoy Sita without Ram, or fortune without Lord Ramachandra, by not engaging in the fortunes and the service of the Supreme Lord. And Prabhupada was in Bombay, as we said, and Prabhupada, actually it's a story behind Prabhupada's efforts in Bombay, as we know from reading Prabhupada Amrita. When Srila Prabhupada first acquired the land, he made the effort to purchase the land from one Mr. Nair, and actually Mr. Nair was a very influential person. He actually had wealth, he had position and power, and nonetheless he was trying to exploit Srila Prabhupada, and he was trying to get Prabhupada to purchase the land, but he never had really any intentions of giving the land for the temple in Juhu. And Prabhupada, of course, came out victorious. And Prabhupada was sitting and he was talking to one disciple, I think it was Haridas. And Prabhupada was telling this story about the battle. And he's saying how he had been engaged in the battle, but because he took shelter of the Lord, ultimately he was victorious. And then he compared, he said that he compared that his success, it was just like, actually told the story, how just as Lord Ramachandra had gone across the ocean when he went to get Sita, Sita was in Lanka, and then Lord Ramachandra came to the ocean, and of course we know Hanuman jumped across the ocean to find out, to locate Sita. But when Lord Ramachandra came to the ocean along with all his monkey soldiers, he said, he made an arrangement that the monkeys, they would take mountaintop stones, trees, and they would build a bridge and they would float in the water. And he crossed the ocean to go to Lanka. So Prabhupada was saying that similarly, in America, the Westerners, they had tried to kidnap Sita from Ram. And he said that he also had to cross the ocean. And he was also assisted just as Ramachandra was assisted by the monkeys in taking Sita back to Ram. He says also, you have also come here to assist me. And he was comparing all of us, his disciples, to be like the monkey army, the Vanaras, who had crossed the ocean with Ramachandra. got to that point, but it was it was connected to the point of the verse that just as Ravana has attempted to take away the goddess of fortune and steal the goddess of fortune and use and exploit her for his own selfish purposes. In the same way, people who are possessed of a mentality of trying to enjoy all fortune, which ultimately belongs to the Lord, for their own selfish purposes, they have the same type of lusty mentality, and Ravana represents this lust. And so the point also that I was making is that although that we were not very qualified in assisting Srila Prabhupada, and many of us had not come from a very exalted background, not very highly trained in Vedic culture, Vedic etiquette, many of us not even very learned. But nonetheless, Srila Prabhupada, when he was using this point, he said, because you have helped me, we have become successful in our battle against Mr. Nair. And therefore, although Mr. Nair was trying to steal or exploit the devotees who were attempting to use everything for the service of the Lord, and although he was very powerful, and although he was very influential, and although he was very wealthy, still he was not able to come out successful. And on the other hand, we, and all of you who have come to help me, we were successful because our purposes were virtuous, because we were simply interested in pleasing the Lord. And Prabhupada explained that was his qualification in humility, and he also gave credit to the devotees who assisted him, saying that because your purposes were true and virtuous, therefore we were successful in the battle. Which makes me think of also the example which is given in the Mahabharata, that Duryodhana, when they were preparing for battle, Duryodhana was also of a similar mentality. He was thinking that when battle was being prepared for, that he thought he should try to go to Krishna, because Krishna had power over 1 million infantrymen and soldiers. I think they were called the Narayanas. Huh?
Narayan Sena.
Yes. And then Arjuna was thinking the same. Arjuna was thinking that also similarly, when Duryodhana was going, but he had left before him, and then Arjuna was thinking also he should go to Dwarka. And they went to take darshan of Krishna. And then, although I think it was Duryodhana arrived first, and Duryodhana, he entered into the room and he sat by Krishna's head, took a seat by Krishna's head, and later Arjuna entered and he preferred to sit at Krishna's feet so that he could simply stare at his face and offer his pranams to Krishna. And they were waiting for Krishna to awaken from his slumber as he was being fanned. And when Krishna woke, because Arjuna was at his feet, he saw Arjuna first. And then Krishna sat up and saw that Duryodhana was sitting next to him, and they asked him, what is it your interest? Why have you come here? And Duryodhana told him, he said that, actually we know that you are equally disposed towards both of us, and therefore I have come to request, he said also, and because I was here first, you should accept my request, and I have come to request your help in this great war. And Krishna then explained to Duryodhana, and he said, oh yes, although you have come here first, I have first person I saw when I awoke was Arjuna. And he's also younger than you. And the younger should be given deference to someone who is older. And he said, and also he said, you want me to participate in battle, but you should know I will not take part in this battle. But you can have your choice, Arjuna. So you can have either my army or you can have me. And Arjuna, without hesitation, immediately said, I want you, Krishna. Even though Krishna wasn't going to fight. I want you. And the other was thinking, oh, what a fool. He was overcome in ecstasy. How is it possible? Arjuna would make such a foolish mistake. That means I get Krishna's arm. So, just as it states in the Bhagavad Gita, that at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, I think it's the final verse, that wherever there is Krishna and wherever there is Arjuna, certainly all virtue, there'll be victory, everything auspicious will be there. Because Arjuna chose Krishna, he would not take arms in battle. Of course, there's that one time when Krishna did. It's a nice story in that connection also. And we know the story when Bhishma was about to kill Arjuna with an arrow, and that he had vowed with 5 arrows he would kill each of the Pandavas. And he said that the only way I could be stopped is if Krishna intervenes. But yet Krishna had already made a vow to never take part in the battle, or to carry any weapons in the battle. So Arjuna was in a compromised position. Bhishma had the opportunity to shoot him and to kill him, but yet when Krishna saw that, he immediately took out the wheel of the chariot and he used it as a weapon to attack Bhishma. And Arjuna was very disturbed upon seeing this. There's that well-known painting we see of Arjuna. He's clasped Krishna around the waist as Krishna is approaching Bhishma with the wheel of the chariot. And he's actually appealing to Krishna, don't do this, not for me, it's not worth it. You've made a vow. Don't break your vow for me. And he's declaring, as Krishna declares, that he would not take any weapon, but he was ready to break his vow, because Bhishma also made a vow. And Bhishma made a vow. He said, only if Krishna stops me. And Bhishma was also a devotee. So to protect Bhishma's words, he broke his own vow and lifted the chariot wheel and ran after Bhishma. And Prabhupada actually uses this example when he quotes the verse in the Bhagavad Gita, Kanti Apati Janihi Nami Bhakti Pranashiti, where he tells Arjuna that Arjuna, you should declare it boldly, that my devotee is never vanquished. And Prabhupada explains that Krishna told Arjuna to declare it, because Krishna said, if I declare it, some people may doubt my word, because sometimes I may break my own vow. But if you declare it, everyone will have to accept it, because one thing I always do is I always uphold the words of my devotee. So better you declare it boldly, Arjuna, that my devotee is never vanquished. Everyone will have to accept. So Arjuna, just as Arjuna was successful Although Krishna did not take up weapons, other than this one incident we spoke about, we understand the glory of Lord Krishna in terms of his dealings with his devotees, is that he is very eager to become subservient to the desires of his devotees. And therefore, although he did not take weapons, he agreed to become Arjuna's chariot driver. So, the verse that we read, and Prabhupada speaks a little bit more about this in the purport, is that Angada and the other commanders of the soldiers of Ramachandra, they faced elephants, infantry, horses, and chariots of the enemy, and hurled against them big trees, mountain peaks, clubs, and arrows. Thus the soldiers of Lord Ramachandra killed Ravana's soldiers, who had lost all good fortune because Ravana had been condemned by the anger of Lord Sita. And Prabhupada explained in the purport, he said that the soldiers of Lord Ramachandra, the soldiers Lord Ramachandra recruited in the jungle were monkeys, and didn't even have proper equipment with which to fight the soldiers. They didn't have any modern warfare. All they used was trees and stones. And they were monkeys. Of course, there's another story in that connection comes to mind, that actually Ravana had been cursed by Nandi. When Ravana was traveling around in the airship that he had gotten from Kuvera, and he was not trying to, he was successful in his efforts to conquer everyone he came in contact with. And when he was flying in this ship, Pushpaka, he came to the abode of Lord Shiva. When he came to the abode of Lord Shiva, all of a sudden the Pushpaka stopped and wouldn't go any farther. And when the Pushpaka stopped, he was wondering, what is it but force? What is it that's prevented me? So he got down from Pushpaka and tried to ascertain what was the cause for his ship stopping, and he saw Nandi, who was not externally very beautiful. In fact, when Ravana saw him, he began to belittle him and said, "You have a face that looks just like a monkey." And then he began speaking against Lord Shiva also. And when Nandi heard his statements that were made about Lord Shiva, he said, "You fool, how could you make such statements about Lord Shiva? Don't you understand what an auspicious person he is?" So because of your statements of Lord Shiva, and because you have said that I look like a monkey, and he said, "You will have to come back again. You will have to be killed," he said, "by a whole race of monkeys." I curse you to be killed by a whole race of monkeys. So of course, that was another reason why the Vanaras, they were successful, is because of Nandi's curse. Of course, there's more to that story that I think it was Ravana became very disturbed. Lord Shiva was sitting on Kailas with Parvati, and when he saw that the hill was there, he just tried to lift the hill and moved it out of the way and caused some disturbance on the hill. And then Lord Shiva, understanding that, he took his toe and he pushed down the hill, so it trapped Ravana's arms underneath the hill. And he had to stay that way for a very, very long time, hundreds of years, I think it was. He stayed that way. And then he understood that Lord Shiva must be very powerful, and began offering prayers to Lord Shiva. And Lord Shiva then appeared before him, and being pleased by his prayers, he offered to give him some benediction. So Ravana was thinking, oh, yes. So he asked for the benediction to have Lord Shiva's weapons. And Lord Shiva granted that benediction. Of course, even he had Lord Shiva's weapon, Ravana was not successful in defeating Ravana. So, Prabhupada takes advantage of this verse and saying that even though Ravana's soldiers were equipped with weapons of modern warfare, whereas the monkeys could only throw stones and mountain peaks and trees, and he said it was only Lord Ramachandra and Lakshman who shot some arrows. But because the soldiers of Ravana were condemned by the curse of Mother Sita, the monkeys were able to kill them simply by throwing stones and trees. And then Prabhupada said, there are two kinds of strength, Daiva and Purushakara. Daiva refers to the strength achieved from the transcendence, and Purushakara refers to the strength organized by one's own intelligence and power. Transcendental power is always superior to the power of the materialist. Depending on the mercy of the Supreme Lord, one must fight one's enemies even though one may not be equipped with modern weapons. Of course, we may think of enemies, as simply to be external enemies, but also, one also has to fight the internal enemies too. In fact, there is a verse, Nayam Atma Balahanina Labhya Yachat Pramadam Tapiso Vyapyalingat, that the Supreme Lord cannot be achieved by those who have no spiritual strength. They require spiritual strength, not material strength. Bala. Nayamatma Bala Hanena Labhya. Bala actually refers to spiritual strength. It cannot be achieved by those who are wild or those who are whimsical. Such persons who endeavor to satisfy the Lord, they can actually achieve the Lord, ultimately the destination of the Lord, by the mercy of the Lord. So this verse actually explains that in order to defeat one's enemies of lust, anger, madness, envy, these are described as the enemies. These are the internal enemies. And therefore, just as one has to be fully dependent upon the Lord to be successful in defeating one's enemy, even though one may not have by one's own strength, one may not be able to do it. This verse and purport also very nicely explains how our devotee can defeat the enemies of lust, anger, and greed, and madness, not by his own strength, but by taking shelter of the Lord. It's not due to our own strength, and Prabhupada even makes that point. He quotes the verse, Tasmat Saveshu Kalishu Mama Nusma Yujita Mayapata Manobudya Mami Vaishya Shangshayaha. He tells Arjuna, he says that you should meditate upon me, you should think of me, and at the same time you should fight for me with your mind dedicated to me, with your mind fixed on me and your activities dedicated to me. You will achieve me of this, there is no doubt. And Prabhupada quotes that, he says that, therefore Krishna instructed Arjuna, Mama Nushmara Yujita, think of me and fight. We should fight our enemy to the best of our ability. But for victory, we must depend on the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So in the same way, just as Ravana represents lust, and our efforts to fight the enemies of lust, anger, greed, madness, delusion, and envy, we should know that it's never possible to be successful in the battle against our enemies by our own strength alone. But actually one is always dependent upon spiritual strength and is always dependent upon the mercy of the Lord. Krishna states in the Bhagavad Gita, Yogi Nama Pisave Shamma Gatina Taratmana Shadavam Bhajate Yumam Same Yukta Tamomata Mataha. He says that the devotee who always worships me in devotional service is most intimately united with me in yoga, and Krishna says, I consider him to be the greatest yogi, the greatest mystic. He's the most powerful. Why is he the most powerful? Because he's fully dependent upon the most powerful. And because he's fully dependent upon the most powerful, then he gets assistance from the Lord and is protected by the Lord. The Lord is known as Rishikesh, he is the master of the senses, and therefore it is also stated that that when one fully engages his mind, his words, body, his senses in the service of the Supreme Lord Rishikesh, then automatically what happens is that he becomes Savopadavini Muktam, he becomes freed from external designations. He actually becomes free from identification of this gross physical body. And his senses will automatically become controlled. Senses become controlled because he has taken shelter of Rishikesh, who is the master of the senses. And Krishna, who gives the devotee who engages his senses in his service the superior form of pleasure for his senses. Vishaya vinivartate naraharasya dehinam rasavajam rasopyasva param drishvar nivartate, that the embodied soul may restrict themselves for sense enjoyment, even though the taste for sense objects still remains. But he ceases these engagements when he experiences a higher taste that becomes fixed in his consciousness. Therefore, Krishna is very kind. He's very eager to give protection to those who depend on him, take shelter of him. And therefore one who knows, not only by his intelligence, but knows by his own realization that even though one may not have any qualification to be the greatest yogi, to be able to control the mind and the senses by his own strength, he always continuously prays to the Lord that I understand that it is not by my strength that I'll ever be able to conquer my mind and senses. But you, Krishna, so very kind, just as we say every time before we take prasadam. But we pray to the Lord that you have given us, you're so very kind, Krishna, you have given us this nice prasadam just to help us to control the tongue. So Krishna is very kind, he has given himself, he is giving strength, he is giving a higher taste in the form of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He is given a form of Govinda, one who gives pleasure to the senses. He helps us control the senses by engaging our senses in the service of the Lord. And in this way, a devotee understands that it is never by my own strength that I will be able to conquer these enemies. Therefore, just as Arjuna displayed by his ideal example, it's always best to have Krishna and to always be exclusively dependent on Krishna as he was and all the Pandavas, and as also as the entire Vanara army, the monkeys, were always very eager to satisfy Lord Rama and to engage in his service and to please him, or to speak of his most confidential servant, Hanuman, who was always faithfully serving him in all situations, and even waiting, always waiting for the call of his worshipful Lord and King Purusha, Loka, waiting for Lord Ramachandra to call him. In fact, I think there's one story, I don't know if I can remember, maybe somebody may be able to help me. One time, Krishna sent somebody to get Hanuman, and I can't remember who he sent. He sent a messenger to get Hanuman, and to come to Dwarka or something like that. And when Hanuman heard it, he didn't want to leave, he didn't want to give up his service, and he was thinking that how could he possibly give up his service and go to Dwarka, give service to Ramachandra to go to Dwarka. And then whoever went as a messenger, and he came back and he told Krishna what had happened. And so Krishna said, oh, okay, now you go back again, but this time you're going to he told, I think, Satyabhama to become Sita. She couldn't do it, so she asked Rukmini to become Sita. And he asked Balaram to become Lakshman. And he asked, was it? Somebody else. And then he sent the messenger again, and he said, Your worshipful Lord Ramachandra is calling you. Sita is there, Lakshman is there, and they're all there. And immediately, Hanuman left Kimpurusha, immediately went to see his worshipful Lord, who was previously, he wouldn't go, he wouldn't leave. That's Hanuman, is the faithful servant of Lord Ramachandra, and he never gives up the service of his worshipful Lord. And therefore his virtues, his glories are extolled throughout the three worlds as to be one of the greatest servitors of the Lord. So, this is the criteria of success when one has to deal with enemies. And therefore, even though one may not be so materially qualified or even a great mystic yogi, but if one simply tries to please the Lord and serve the Lord, just as these monkeys who only had stones and only had trees to fight the army of Ravana, who had all kinds of warfare, they were successful because of their being accepted by Lord Ramachandra as servants. In the same way, if we aspire to become good servants and depend upon the Lord, we may also become successful in our fight, in our battle against the material energy and conquering these enemies of lust, anger, greed, delusion, badness, and envy. I was told I shouldn't speak long because the feast is outside today, and all of you have to have time to honor prasadam and before it gets dark and clean up too. So I'll end here. If anybody would like to ask any questions or comments, the floor is open. Yes.
When Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came to South India, that trip, the only two books he took back are Brahma Samhita and Krishna Karnamurtam. So can you explain the significance of only like those books and why he only carried those two books back to?
Those are the books that he found. As far as I know, those are the books that he found. Therefore, he took them, Krishna Karnamurta and Brahma Samhita. Of course, he saw the Kumbha Puran. He only wanted 2 pages from Kumbha Puran, just to show Rama's Vipin. Yes.
So, one of the main qualities that stands out from Hanuman is being faithful servant. How do we cultivate that quality through Guru and Krishna in our life?
Become a faithful servant. How to cultivate it? Prabhupada explains in the Upadeshamrita that bhakti is cultivation. And although the seed of bhakti may be by the mercy of Guru and Krishna, Brahmanda Brahmate Konda Bhagavan Jeev, the seed of bhakti, for the one who is fortunate, can be impregnated or planted within the heart. Then the cultivation that is required is the watering of the seed. If one doesn't water the seed, then naturally it won't grow. And also it's explained while watering the seed, one also has to be careful, because while watering the seed, sometimes the weeds will grow faster than the plant. And if the weeds grow faster than the plant, then the weeds have the capacity to choke the growth of the plant, and therefore inhibit its growth. So cultivation means, that watering process means that there's only one way, and that was also how Lord Chaitanya instructed in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, his instructions to Rupa Goswami. He explained that the watering, or the cultivation, begins with hearing. And if one doesn't go on hearing faithfully, because hearing is one thing, but one has to be faithful to Krishna's narrations. We oftentimes quote that verse from the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, where Krishna is telling Uddhava, having awakened faith in my narrations, being disgusted with sense gratification, knowing that all sense gratification leads to misery, but still not being able to give it up. Krishna tells Uddhava that you should simply continue to remain faithful and happy and go on hearing these narrations. Because my devotee, he knows that even though sense gratification leads to suffering, when he engages it, he sincerely repents for it. So the beginning, bhakti begins when one actually has sufficient faith to go on hearing about bhakti. Because that's the only qualification for cultivating bhakti. As Krishna also says to Arjuna, in the 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, he tells Arjuna that the highest is that you should always meditate on me, think of me constantly. But he says next, but if you can't think of me constantly, then you follow the regular principles of bhakti yoga. In this way you cultivate the desire to attain to me. So, atachitang samadhatam anashiknosi maistiram abhyasu yukena tato mamichapti dhananjaya. So he says that it's a cultivate, you cultivate. Cultivate the desire to attain me. Follow the regular principles of bhakti yoga means to regularly hear. If one doesn't regularly hear, with faith, one actually has to have faith to go on hearing the glories of pure devotional service. And one very important verse, which we also in the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which describes the qualities and characteristics of hearing about pure devotional service. Krishna was Narada Muni speaking to Vasudeva, and he was saying that pure devotional service rendered to the Supreme Lord is so transcendently potent that simply by hearing about such service, simply by glorifying it in response, simply by meditating on it, simply by faithfully and respectfully accepting it, and simply by praising service rendered by others, even a person who hates demigods and all living entities in the whole universe can immediately become purified. Such is the glory of hearing about pure devotional service. Because sometimes when we hear about pure devotional service, we think, I need to hear about something more relevant. This pure devotional service seems too distant, and almost seems like, it's a discussion about a unique clique, of Krishna and his devotees and Srimad Bhagavatam, but what's this got to do with me? And it almost seems like, it's like fantasy. I hear about these pure devotees and how Krishna reciprocates with them. But the only way to become qualified is to go on hearing about pure devotional service, as evidenced by that verse, because it's so powerful, so potent, that if you simply hear about it, simply glorify it in response, even though you may not have it, but if you faithfully and respectfully accept that it exists, and then just go on hearing about it, and then praise, whenever we see somebody else who has it and does it, praise somebody else's service, which is rendered without motivation, that becomes a very relevant topic. It immediately becomes relevant, because even a person who hates the demigods and all living beings in the universe can immediately become purified. That means, hey, that's relevant. I can benefit from it too. I can benefit. So the watering process means go on hearing with faith. Just go on hearing with the glories of Krishna and his pure devotees. And if one goes on hearing with faith, that is the watering process that Lord Chaitanya has described through Rupa Goswami, which is the watering of the seed, which cultivates bhakti, and because it's not by our efforts alone, because to hear means we have to hear somebody who's speaking. And from them we get strength. It's a science, it's cultivation, but it's tangible, it's actually palpable experience for those who dedicate their lives to continuing to engage in that cultivation of bhakti. And if one doesn't cultivate bhakti, then the difficulty is that we will not feel the strength that we need to cultivate, and we'll become weakened and overwhelmed and overpowered by the allurements of the illusory energy, because on our own, we can't defeat Maya. We simply cannot. She's just too borrowed. And our own strength, she'll capture us, allure us, and we'll find ourselves falling. We oftentimes quote that verse. Kaviraj Goswami states in Chaitanya Charitamrita, where he says, "Path is difficult, I am blind, and my feet are slipping again and again. Therefore I pray to the saints to grant me their stick of mercy for my support." So he says, compares himself to like a person who's traversing a slippery path and always falling. And I'm blind too, he says. And I'm always slipping. So I need some extra support. It's like a person who's trying to go up a side of a hill. If he has a stick, it's extra support to move forward. So we have to take shelter of that stick of mercy and get the extra support to overcome it. That's cultivation. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. It's exactly 5 o'clock. I think we should end here. Hare Krishna, thank you very much. I'll